Hello. Recently, the National Book Awards have been releasing the long lists in the various categories for this year's awards. And just yesterday, they announced the 10 books which are nominated for the Fiction Awards. So I want to do an overview of this list, give brief summaries of the books, and if I have any thoughts or feelings about them. I'd love to know what you think about the list. Have you read any of these books? Would you recommend them? Or are you interested in reading any of them now? Now, I always enjoy looking at this list and seeing which book wins, but I don't often actively follow the National Book Awards, partly because this is an American award and sometimes the books which are nominated haven't been published where I live here in the UK yet, but all of them except for one in this year's list have been published here, and that final one I am really keen on, so I might try to get a copy of it somehow. And I have read 3.5 of these books so far, and I've read half of one because I'm currently reading it, which is Creation Lake by Rachel Kushner, which I am reading with my online book club, and we are just starting to discuss it. So if you want to join in that, I'll put a link to my online book club below so you can find out more information about it. And I'm halfway through this book and I'm really getting into it now. I wasn't quite sure at first, partly because I feel like I was slightly had a misstep about what it was actually about, because it's kind of sold as a spy novel and or a kind of reinvented kind of spy novel, and it is that. It's about an American woman that goes undercover, but it is much more about. There's a lot in it about Neanderthals and kind of pondering a lot of big questions about where we came from, which is explored in a really interesting way. And it's taken me a little bit to get into this narrator who is an undercover kind of spy, but she is very guarded, but she also is quite judgmental, and I find her quite catty and funny now, but also because she is so supremely confident, and I think it's kind of starting to reveal that maybe she isn't as in control as she thinks she is. So yeah, this is a really intriguing book, kind of going undercover in this eco-commune in France, and also there's a lot of commentary about French life. So I'm really enjoying this so far, and part of the reason that I've read so many of the books on this list is there's a number of overlap books with the Booker Prize, which I am really actively following, including My Friends by Hisham Matar, which I read earlier this year and I loved so much. It is so poignant how this explores being exiled from one's own country and living in this kind of limbo state where being disconnected from one's culture and family, and trying to take solace in art and literature, but also friendship, as the title says. And it explores how his friends are going through sort of similar things, but take different approaches to dealing with issues to do with exile and having conflict with one's own country. And I read a comment from a reader recently who was criticizing this book because it focuses very much on a male perspective, and some of his closest friends are men in this book, although he does have a very good female friend as well, and then there's another friend of his, female friend of his, who he goes to an art gallery and they sit down and they're discussing a painting quite at length for a while. So I think it does touch upon the lives of some female characters, but I would agree that it is through a very strong male point of view. But I didn't really have much issue with that personally. But I don't know, if you've read this book, let me know what you think. Also, James by Percival Everett, which is also nominated for the Booker and is also such an incredibly strong novel, telling the story of the adventures of Huckleberry often through the point of view of the character of Jim, and kind of reclaiming his perspective, and it is so charming and witty and funny, getting his perspective, but also incredibly poignant and meaningful, how it explores his life and his strong desire to reconnect with his family and to establish an independent life for himself, since he was born into and was living in slavery until he ran away. And it's so clever what Everett does in this novel, that it's just such a joy to read. And if you're not familiar with the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, I can understand how you might not get as much out of this book, but just reading it on its own, I think is also like such a pleasure and such a rewarding experience. The other book that I've read on the list is Martyr by Kaveh Akbar, and I really connected with this book, even though the central character is very different from me in some ways. So this follows a young American man who is the son of Iranian immigrants who have both died. So he's mourning the loss of his parents and pondering the meaning of their lives and how he wants his own life to have meaning. He desperately wants his life to have meaning. He wants to be a poet, but he's struggling with addiction and just struggling with life in general, and deciding how he wants his life to go. And he's sort of reaching this point in his life where he has to make some firm decisions about what he wants to do with his adulthood and how his adulthood is going to play out. And he has many meaningful conversations with a number of different people that he encounters, but also some imagined conversations. And it's so creative and playful how it approaches this subject matter, while also like retaining the real emotional core of his conflicts. So I found this a beautifully written book. A novel I keep meaning to read is All Fours by Miranda July, which follows the life of a woman who is in her 40s. She's a semi-famous artist, and she announces one day that she is going on a cross-country road trip. So she leaves her husband and her child at home, but she is almost immediately diverted from this journey and follows this kind of absurd path. And I really enjoy Miranda July's fiction that I've read by her, and the films that she made. And she thinks she's so creative and has such a singular and kind of like absurdly like funny perspective. And I've just heard such great things about this novel. A novel which was just published here in the UK last month in August is You're Dead by Sam Sax, which follows a queer Jewish individual who engages in a protest in 2016 in New York City. And it follows his life and how he came to this point, which turns into a crisis. The final four books on the list I hadn't heard of before, but they sound really interesting. And it's part of the reason why I enjoy following book prize lists, that it tips me off to books that I should probably be aware of. So there is the short story collection Ghostroots by Pemi Aguda, and these are 12 short stories that look at characters involved in modern day life in Lagos, but is also like exploring their ancestral history and their connection with the past. And just recently I read the excellent novel Blessings, set in Nigeria, so I'm really up for more Nigerian fiction. The Most by Jessica Anthony. This novel follows a couple in the 1950s who have kind of settled down into their like expected roles, where the husband is the breadwinner and the wife is the homemaker, but they really feel themselves to be so much more of this. And I'm really interested in the subject matter of how, you know, in kind of the 1950s we had these like idealized like nuclear families, although really really like human relationships and individuals are so much more complicated than the kind of expected roles in that kind of structure of family. And I just realized that I have a copy of Jessica Anthony's previous novel, Enter the Aardvark, and this has been sitting on my shelves ever since it came out. So yeah, I want to get to reading this first before getting to this new novel. Catalina by Karla Cornejo Villavicencio. This novel follows a year in the life of a young woman named Catalina, who was born in Latin America and narrowly escaped death there, and she was raised by her undocumented grandparents in America. She really excelled scholastically and has gone to Harvard, and she is in her senior year, but she suddenly realizes that there are not as many opportunities for her as she was hoping for. She also starts a romantic relationship with a young man who is studying Latin America, and he's kind of explaining Latin American history and politics to her. It kind of reminds me of a novel I read earlier this year, And Then She Fell, about a young indigenous woman who marries a white man who is studying her indigenous culture and then kind of explains it to her. So I think it's exploring some of these awkward relationships. And finally, there is a collection of interconnected short stories called Rejection by Tony Tulathimutte. And this fiction explores sex and relationships and identity and the internet in the lives of a number of young people and how their lives touch upon each other through dating apps and social media and meeting up in bars. And I often say that like books of interconnected short stories is kind of like my favorite kind of fiction. So I'm really eager to read this, but it hasn't been published here in the UK. I think it's only just being published in the US. So hopefully it'll come out here at some point. So those are all of the books on the list. Like I said, I'd love to know how many of these books have you read or are you interested in reading any of them now? Please let me know about that in the comments below, and it'll be really interesting to see what is shortlisted and what ultimately wins in November. But I hope you're doing well and reading good things, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.